People sleep peaceably in their beds at night only, because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. George Orwell. Happiness can exist only in acceptance. Freedom is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. If you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. Lies will pass into history. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. George Orwell. Those who abjure violence can do so only because others are committing violence on their behalf. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Therefore Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. We sleep safe in our beds because rough men stand ready in the night to visit violence on those who would do us harm. George Orwell. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, and wiser than the one that comes after it. George Orwell. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. The essence of being human is that one does not seek perfection. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. George Orwell. So much of left-wing thought is a kind of playing with fire by people who don't even know that fire's hot. As with the Christian religion, the worst advertisement for socialism is its adherents. George Orwell. All the war propaganda, all the screaming and lies and hatred comes invariably from people who are not fighting. We have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men. George Orwell. Sometimes the first duty of intelligent men is the restatement of the obvious. Serious sport has nothing to do with fair play. It is bound up with hatred, jealousy, boastfulness, disregard of all rules, and sadistic pleasure in witnessing violence. In other words, it is war minus the shooting. George Orwell. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively, to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish squirting out ink. George Orwell. The quickest way of ending a war is to lose it. The nationalist not only does not disapprove of atrocities committed by his own side, but he has a remarkable capacity for not even hearing about them. George Orwell. The essential act of war is destruction, not necessarily of human lives, but of the products of human labor. George Orwell. Dickens is one of those authors who are well worth stealing. A tragic situation exists precisely when virtue does not triumph, but when it is still felt that man is nobler than the forces which destroy him. Big Brother is watching you. As I write, highly civilized human beings are flying overhead, trying to kill me. George Orwell. Language ought to be the joint creation of poets and manual workers. Every war, when it comes, or before it comes, is represented not as a war but as an act of self-defense against a homicidal maniac. George Orwell. War is evil, but it is often the lesser evil. He was an embittered atheist, the sort of atheist who does not so much disbelieve in God as personally dislike him. Part of the reason for the ugliness of adults in a child's eyes is that the child is usually looking upwards, and few faces are at their best when seen from below. George Orwell. Prolonged, indiscriminate reviewing of books is a quite exceptionally thankless, irritating, and exhausting job. It not only involves praising trash but constantly inventing reactions towards books about which one has no spontaneous feeling whatever. George Orwell. One cannot really be a Catholic and grown up, enlightened people seldom or never possess a sense of responsibility. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. For a creative writer, possession of the truth is less important than emotional sincerity. Not to expose your true feelings to an adult seems to be instinctive. From the age of 7 or 8 onwards, many people genuinely do not want to be saints, and it is probable that some who achieve or aspire to sainthood have never felt much temptation to be human beings. There is hardly such a thing as a war in which it makes no difference who wins. Nearly always one side stands more or less for progress, the other side more or less for reaction. War is a way of shattering to pieces materials which might otherwise be used to make the masses too comfortable and too intelligent. George Orwell. If you have embraced a creed which appears to be free from the ordinary dirtiness of politics, a creed from which you yourself cannot expect to draw any material advantage, surely that proves that you are in the right. George Orwell. No one can look back on his school days and say with truth that they were altogether unhappy. Joyce is a poet and also an elephantine pedant. One can love a child, perhaps, more deeply than one can love another adult, but it is rash to assume that the child feels any love in return. It is also true that one can write nothing readable unless one constantly struggles to efface one's own personality. Good prose is like a window pane. George Orwell. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. George Orwell. To an ordinary human being, love means nothing if it does not mean loving some people more than others. George Orwell. Liberal power, worshipper without power. Advertising is the rattling of a stick inside a swill bucket. Mankind is not likely to salvage civilization unless he can evolve a system of good and evil which is independent of heaven and hell. George Orwell. Early in life, I had noticed that no event is ever correctly reported in a newspaper. Serious sport is war minus the shooting. The aim of a joke is not to degrade the human being, but to remind him that he is already degraded. No advance in wealth, no softening of manners, no reform or revolution has ever brought human equality a millimeter nearer. George Orwell. The intellectual is different from the ordinary man, but only in certain sections of his personality, and even then not all the time. To walk through the ruined cities of Germany is to feel an actual doubt about the continuity of civilization. Whatever is funny is subversive. Every joke is ultimately a custard pie. A dirty joke is a sort of mental rebellion. Society has always to demand a little more from human beings than it will get in practice. Saints should always be judged guilty until they are proved innocent. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. Patriotism is usually stronger than class hatred and always stronger than internationalism. I sometimes think that the price of liberty is not so much eternal vigilance as eternal dirt. The atom bombs are piling up in the factories. The police are prowling through the cities. The lies are streaming from the loudspeakers. But the earth is still going round the sun. George Orwell. Whoever is winning at the moment will always seem to be invincible. In our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. A dirty joke is a sort of mental rebellion. We of the sinking middle class may sink without further struggles into the working class where we belong, and probably when we get there, it will not be so dreadful as we feared. For, after all, we have nothing to lose. George Orwell. Men are only as good as their technical development allows them to be. The atmosphere of orthodoxy is always damaging to prose, and above all it is completely Ruinous novel. The most anarchical of all forms of literature. When it comes to the pinch, human beings are heroic. It is almost universally felt that when we call a country democratic, we are praising it. Consequently, the defenders of every kind of regime claim that it is a democracy, and fear that they might have to stop using the word if it were tied down to any one meaning. George Orwell,